Welcome back to Words of Paradise. I'm your host, Leon Idol, and it seems like the media and the internet will stop at nothing to try and blame Henry Cavill and Zack Snyder for all the misdoings and the reason that certain things went wrong. It's really quite incredible, I won't lie. Especially considering we all know that Henry Cavill is probably the best Superman that we've ever had, at least the best Superman in the modern era. And Zack Snyder, while he was misguided in certain areas, well, the Snyder Cut was pretty awesome, so I don't know what all the hate's about. But this article says James Gunn is not the reason Henry Cavill is no longer Superman, Zack Snyder is. Well, we already know this is false, because James Gunn is the one that fired Henry Cavill, not Zack Snyder. You can't say Zack Snyder is the reason Henry is no longer Superman, when Zack Snyder told him, no, we're rebooting it, you're not coming back. Before James Gunn decided on a reboot, Zack Snyder's controversial take on Superman ultimately poisoned Henry Cavill's future as the hero. Yeah, you can already tell this is going to be an incredibly bogus, biased article, because Zack Snyder's controversial take on Superman was in the way a Superman film was presented. Zack Snyder's take on the character is still true to the character. He wrote him as hopeful. Yeah, it's a bit darker and grittier, and some people may not like that, but he's still a character that will always do the right thing no matter what. He has a strong moral compass, and there's no... He's still the antithesis to the Zack Snyder-verse version of Batman. I don't know. This seems like... We'll go ahead and get into the article, but it already seems like they're really grasping for straws. The cancellation of Man of Steel 2 has been controversial among the DC fanbase, including those who had problems with the films that Henry Cavill's Superman starred in. Numerous moviegoers had expressed their dislike of new DC Studios head James Gunn getting rid of the previous Superman and his continuity, making the past decade of films essentially irrelevant. Despite Gunn's actions being the cause of this rage, the events can ultimately be tied back to Zack Snyder. I mean, yeah, but that's... Just because the events can be tied back to Snyder doesn't mean that Gunn didn't make the decision. Okay, they're keeping Ezra Miller. So are we going to say, oh, the reason they're keeping Ezra Miller is because of Zack Snyder? No. James Gunn is opting to make that decision. Because Flashpoint is still coming out with Ezra Miller. That could have gotten canceled, like Batgirl, or I think Supergirl was also canceled. Trying to tie everything back to Snyder and save face and, say, oh, but, this isn't Gunn's fault. Seems like you're really propping up Gunn because you're just upset that the internet didn't like the choice that the studios made. The internet, oh, all these fans need to agree with what DC and what James Gunn are doing. They know best. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the Snyder Cut was great. Man of Steel, very good. I like it. It's definitely a different take on Superman, but altogether not a bad take. And as far as they film, as far as shot, like the way it's shot, dynamic. Way better than anything the MCU was doing at the time. The Snyder Cut, like I said, was great. Oh, and Batman vs. Superman. Theatrical version of that movie? Horrible. Garbage. However, the director's cut, which adds a much-needed 40 minutes, A-okay. Not one of the best superhero movies ever made, but not near as awful as the product we got in theaters. So I actually genuinely recommend the director's cut of Batman vs. Superman. All in all, we're going to keep going with this article, but it seems like they're really trying to gaslight us into thinking that, we're the problem for not accepting Gunn. Snyder's controversial Man of Steel and Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice made the former DC Extended Universe something of a toxic property, with its haphazard production leaving even Superman adrift. Yeah, but that wasn't really Snyder's call. That was DC. DC was trying to play catch-up to Marvel. Snyder wanted things to go slower. There's a reason it started with a Superman movie, but by that point, Avengers had come and gone. Heck, Avengers were in Phase 2. I think even Civil War had come and gone. Avengers 2 had come and gone. DC really wanted their piece of the pie, and they rushed things. They forced changes. They're the ones that fired Snyder because he wanted to take his time and build things up the proper way. They say he left the project to deal with his daughter's passing. That was a way to save face. They fired him. We all know this. So, no, let's not say Snyder's controversial films are what did this. Warner Bros. Did this. Due to this, Cavill's time was cut short long before James Gunn got on board, mostly due to how mishandled the whole universe was. Yeah, but the whole universe wasn't Snyder's universe. Snyder did 2 movies and then Justice League. Snyder didn't do Wonder Woman. Snyder didn't do Aquaman. Snyder didn't do Suicide Squad. any of these movies that were in the same continuity. Unlike Marvel, DC didn't have a Kevin Feige. They didn't have a head of the operation. I mean, you could say that Snyder was their Kevin Feige, but to much less an extent. He had a story written, but he didn't have interlocking, intricate stories for one-off films and spin-offs. He had the story of how the Justice League is formed, and that's it. And it's a good story from, at least to my estimation, when you see the director's full visions and when you got the uncut versions and things like that. I like the story. There's still definitely some issues, but as a whole, frankly, I think it does some things better than Marvel. Not a lot, but some things. Here's how the release of Snyder's 2013 Superman reboot sealed the fate of Cavill's Kal-El 9 years ahead of time. More than any other superhero, Superman is associated with hope, optimism, and in unfortunate cases, a bit of outdated cheesiness. The latter issue definitely explains why Snyder made Man of Steel the way he did. As something that went against the more Pollyanna depiction of the character in previous films was certainly a necessity. The idea for a new Superman film was birthed by the success of the Dark Knight trilogy, with Christopher Nolan conceiving it but not wanting to direct it. Instead, Zack Snyder was chosen to helm it, having been impressed by his use of visuals and the ability to deconstruct mythology. While this may have been Snyder's strength elsewhere, it's a weakness concerning Superman. Please, I do hope the article goes on to explain why, because this is absolutely not a weakness. If anything, it is a strength in doing Superman, because he didn't need to deconstruct Superman. He actually kept Superman the exact same. He deconstructed the world around Superman. And I think that's a very interesting way to do a superhero film, especially when Marvel was giving us the same carbon copy, action scene joke, a little bit of emotional payoff, action scene joke, several movies in a row. Zack Snyder sees the idea of superheroes being faultless figures with squeaky clean reception as being outdated, especially once he brought the superhero comic book deconstruction Watchmen to the big screen, which is an incredible film. Watchmen had a story in which superheroes are painfully fallible people, with most powerful among them losing his humanity and sense of connection to the world at large. It was an utterly cynical story that completely ripped away the innocence of superheroes, and it's influenced generations of creators since then. Yeah, but again, it's still an adaptation. In all reality, aside from some story structure stuff to make it make a bit more sense or be a bit more palatable for movies, Snyder didn't really change anything. He was the director. He directed. There's still Alan Moore's comic he was adapting. It seems like they're trying to give Zack Snyder credit when, something awesome is done, like Watchmen, but then take credit away for Superman, when at the end of the day, if you're the director, don't get me wrong, the making of the movie falls on you, but you're still not necessarily the writer, the producer. You're not all. It takes all these elements to come together, and the director has to be kind of the linchpin. That doesn't mean you're not going to notice flaws in other areas, but a good director can minimize those flaws. I don't see how Zack Snyder failed to minimize a lot of flaws in Man of Steel, aside from the fact that people didn't like that it was darker and grittier, probably because we were spoiled by the MCU and expecting a bright, happy joke fest. Well, that's kind of what you get if you go in with built-up expectations a certain way. Am I very anti-James Gunn? Absolutely. I don't want him working on this. I don't want him working on DC. I want him fired. But I'm not going to go into his films with the expectations they'll be bad. I'm going to go in with a blank slate, regardless of how I feel about James Gunn. That's how Snyder should be treated as well. That's how all of DC should have been treated. But it inherently got compared to Marvel. And I guess there's no way to keep that from happening. But that forces all the blame to fall on Snyder when that's not the case. And I think the vast majority of people know it. But once again, this lame website, CBR, wants to act like they know everything and try and gaslight us into thinking that we're the problem for giving Snyder credit where it's due. Hey, post-editing video, Leon here. You're going to see something similar to what you saw in my Rings of Power video if you watched that. If you haven't, please do. It's awesome, great, informational. I mean, not to toot my own horn or anything, but we all love to hate Rings of Power. But back to this. This was like twice the length. It was borderline 20 minutes, like 18. When really this was just a super long article that goes into explaining that, oh, Zack Snyder sucks, and because Zack Snyder sucks, that's the reason that Cavill's not coming back. Because Zack Snyder made him the figurehead for his version of the DCEU, and Warner Bros. Wants to distance themselves from that as to not confuse people. And basically, it's just it would be an additional 10 minutes of me reading a Zack Snyder and Henry Cavill hit piece, and I really don't want to do that. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's good for the community. I don't think it's good for the film industry. I don't think it's good for you guys watching to read some spoiled news journalist for comic book resources opinion on why Zack Snyder didn't work, and why the neckbeards who liked Zack Snyder's work are toxic fans. This article doesn't say that, but it's been said before in plenty of other articles for the last 4 or 5 years. All in all, I'm going to go ahead and probably cut it here. I'm going to spice back into my outro, and there might be a couple more points I wanted to make. But at the end of the day, yeah, if you want to read this article, you can, but I wouldn't give CBR the clicks. Just watch my video, and the little bit you get in this first 10 minutes, just imagine an additional 10 minutes of this. It's truly nothing special or spectacular. Just another Zack Snyder hit piece, and basically trying to gaslight you into going and seeing James Gunn stuff because he's going to be the bestest ever. But yeah, that's it. I'm out. Sorry about that. Slowly making audiences aware that Cavill would be phased out of the role. Sadly, the actor who was perfect for the hero was let down by Zack Snyder, whose lack of cohesion with the fundamentals of the character derailed him on the big screen for a good 10 years. Absolute atrocious bogus. You know what? I'm going to stop the video here more or less because I don't want to give my final thoughts. Rather than giving my final thoughts, I gave my thoughts throughout this. I want you guys to give me yours. If you made it to this part, just put in the comments what you think of Henry Cavill as Superman and what you think of Zack Snyder when it comes to how Superman was handled. Whether it be in Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, or the Snyder Cut. Those are 3 movies that Henry Cavill's Superman was in. Tell me how that Snyder had hand in, that Snyder directed. Tell me what you think Snyder did to Superman, good or bad. And tell me, even if bad, do you think that it was the right choice to recast Henry Cavill? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know on Twitter @BoltTheWord. Until next time, this has been Words of Paradise.